Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to the Artsy Raven, and today our special guest is Meg Richman. Raised in a Jewish family by an activist mother and a philosopher father, Meg Richman grew up in a diverse inner city neighborhood that shaped her creative voice. She began as a minimalist painter in Seattle before studying art at UC Berkeley, where she moved into experimental film and later featured filmmaking. Meg spent 15 years in Hollywood as a screenwriter and director. Her film Under Heaven screened at Sundance and was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award. After adopting a child, she returned to the Pacific Northwest to teach at-risk youth, and her novel Lexi Goes to School was inspired by this work. So welcome, Meg.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about how your background in art and film transitioned into writing somehow?
Sure. Well, I went to grad school as a painter, and there encountered a teacher who really influenced me. She was very interested in deconstructed narrative, and I did my master's in Super 8 film, which was what we had at the time. It was pre-digital, and then I came home and to Seattle, and we started a film co-op, and we were making small films. And I got more and more interested in feature-length films and wrote one that got me an agent in LA who said, "You have to move down here if I'm going to help you." So I did. And so I was a screenwriter for a long time, and the whole time I wanted to direct. My clever scheme was, I'll write, and then eventually I'll get to direct the movies I write. Well, that took 10 years to get to that point. And I did get to direct a movie. I am very visual, as you know, having been a painter. I think in images a lot, and so directing was something I really wanted. I wanted to make the story come to life visually. So then, but my career kind of fizzled out when I had a kid. It was too hard to navigate, and so I moved back to Seattle and taught. I needed to make a living, so I taught English. And then my kid and I needed more. I needed something creative, and so I started writing fiction. And my fiction is very influenced visually. It's I describe what I see. I have that movie going on in my head. And so writing is a great way for me to make movies without a film crew, essentially.
Now, do you have any habits when you write?
Yeah. Um, I have the habit. Now I'm retired. I'm retired from teaching, so I have all day,
Mhm.
which is such a gift. I recommend retirement to everyone.
Yeah.
Um, but so I do my morning stuff. I do the puzzles, and I drink my coffee and read the newspaper, and then I sit down at my desk, and I pretty much, well, I walk my dog, and then I sit down at my desk, and I pretty much write all day. But writing means, walking around, cleaning the dishes, and I keep coming back. I keep coming back to the desk.
And
That's my
now,
habit.
the
Yeah.
latest book you have out is Freya the Deer. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired this book?
Yeah. I wrote it during COVID and during the George Floyd, the response to George Floyd's hideous murder. Um, I was feeling uh, kind of, and then Trump was president. I mean, and I don't want to step on any toes, but I was finding the world a shocking place. Everything was in upheaval, and it was painful and ugly to me. And I wanted to look into that. I wanted to look into the spiritual aspect of that and the political aspect of it. And I thought, well, who better to do that than a very innocent narrator, a very innocent protagonist. And I was thinking of Dostoevsky's The Idiot and how people thought he was an idiot, but he was actually a pure soul. And that seemed idiotic to the people around him. So I wanted, initially this book was called Freya the Idiot. And I created this character who was very innocent, and we have neurodivergence in my family, and I'm very familiar from being a teacher, but also from being a mother, with neurodivergent thought process. And not that they're all the same, but with the spectrum and variety of neurodivergence. And so Freya evolved into a neurodivergent, probably autistic character because it was a way of looking at the world through an innocent or through a different brain frame. And that's how I came up with it. Um, and then it kind of organically evolved.
Can you give us like the back cover synopsis of what your book is about?
Yes, Freya is a neurodivergent young woman, and all her life, she has had a sort of monogamous focus, serial monogamy with intense focus on different things over the course of her life. And when she gets to be college age, she's interested in two things. One is, what is the soul? What the heck is the soul? And she goes to a college where she's allowed to make her own major. And so she decides her major is going to be about examining what the soul is. At the same time, she meets a guy, and she becomes obsessed with the romance of their love. He's into her too, and they go to Vegas and get married, and then COVID hits, and they are isolated at his mom's house, and they're still going to school online, and then George Floyd is murdered, and Caleb, the husband, is increasingly radicalized. He's like between his school curriculum and just what's happening in the world, he becomes increasingly radicalized. And in Seattle, we had this thing called the Chaz, which was an autonomous zone that the police left, and it was left to the kids. And he becomes one of the runners of this autonomous zone, which is utopian, but starts to get kind of lawless towards the end of it. And they close it down. The mayor finally closes it down when someone is murdered there. And Caleb is really, he feels like crushed because this utopian dream of a new world is shut down. And he and one of his friends, start to plot a more violent action in protest. And Freya has to decide if she can go with this love of her life into that zone. And that's the main conflict for her.
Okay. Were there any particular moments in the book that felt meaningful to you or based on anything real?
Oh, the whole thing is sort of based on reality to me, like my own inner reality, uh, my own fantasy life, my own political questions. It all feels very real to me. It's not, yeah.
Now, was there
It's
anything challenging in completing the book, the manuscript? Did you find anything hard to overcome?
um well, writing is always a process for me of being open to the muse or whatever, the sort of creative force, I feel like it does come from outside. I don't feel like it's completely just me and my unconscious. It's my unconscious tapped into, some bigger energy out there. And so I think the hardest thing is just to maintain my faith in that, and continue to move forward, open and waiting for that inspiration, kind of, because when I write, I don't feel, if I don't get that inspiration, I don't feel like it's right.
Mm.
So I have to wait for that and be patient and have faith that it will come, and organically the book will write itself, kind of.
Okay. Now, was there any pieces of advice you got from other writers that really resonated to you over your career?
See, I have a writing group, um, and they were very supportive always, and they would ask questions about point of view, or because I'm kind of anarchic in my, some people feel like you have to stay with one character in that person's head, or a third person close. And I have a little habit of moving around, of mind jumping. But I think I figured out intuitively, not consciously, but I've sort of intuitively figured out how to do that in such a way that it works, that I'd like to think it works. So sometimes, but I got help. People pointed out to me that I had that habit, and I had to address address that issue.
Okay, now one last question. Do you have any advice for people that are starting to write?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I think writing classes can be really, really helpful for, if you have, and there's so many online ones now too. If you're not in if you don't live in a city or a town that has a writing center or something. I happen to live in Seattle, where Hugo House is this amazing resource, and there are great teachers coming through there all the time. But you can go online, and get classes from there, and all around the country and Canada. um, and so I suggest taking writing classes, because they will blow your mind. They will open you up, and you'll meet people who will offer you, who may become your writing group. I really recommend having a writing group, so that you share your work on an ongoing basis with people. And maybe, especially at the beginning, keep journaling and keeping a notebook of observations and cool dialogue you might hear on the bus, or just things that might at some point make it their way into your writing, into your story.
Okay. Now you're going to do a reading for us. Can you give us a bit of context and then you can start reading?
Yeah, I'm just going to read from the beginning, because so that you don't require any context. Okay, Freya the Deer. Prelude. As her thin fingers separated the strands of colored wire, she noticed how similar this process was to lace making. Tatting was mostly a lost art, but she had taught herself out of a crafts book and created yards of delicate floral meshwork from old Belgian patterns. These she had sewn onto her curtains, her pillows, her dress hems. The practice meant she was particularly deft at balm making, weaving and connecting the copper threads just so, which she was also doing from instructions, this time found in the library by her partner in crime and copied meticulously into a composition notebook. For his part, he found the library to be a physical version of the internet, with most all information available, absent the memes. He admired her dexterity and attention to detail, and she would do anything for him, with an animal sort of loyalty. He brought her a glazed vegan donut from her favorite bakery 2 bus stops away, and fed it to her bite by bite, lest she'd get her hands sticky. She barely lost focus on her work as she chewed, and he smiled, watching her. He found her concentration beguiling. She wouldn't allow him to play music or even talk while she worked. Setting up the timer and remote was serious business and required her complete attention. The explosives, though unlikely to go off spontaneously, held the power to blow the entire house to kingdom come. Part 1. Atypical. Chapter 1. Freya wasn't considered an idiot because of her academic performance. Though she was singularly uncompetitive, she did well enough in school through a combination of willingness to do as she was told and good reading skills. The latter came from her parents, who were both professors at fancy universities, oft published and quoted by their peers. Starting in infancy, they plied her with stories and books, ballads from every land on earth, and Sesame Street on TV. Even a monkey might have learned to read under these circumstances. Her nature was wide-eyed and guileless, if unsmiling. Her unrelenting failure to respond to others with the expected facial expression or turn of phrase is why she seems stupid to many. It was like she wasn't quite there. Freya's idiocy wasn't spoken aloud, but was generally agreed upon by many of those she encountered, particularly her peers. As a child, she flourished in a world of make-believe. Fairies were more real to her than were the neighborhood children. Each night before trundling into bed, she kissed every one of her many dolls, stuffed animals, and figurines, so none felt neglected. They took turns sleeping with her. She refused to choose favorites, nor did she abandon her clothes to Goodwill when they began to fray and rip with age, but instead carefully embroidered patches over holes or threadbare spots. If pants or skirts became too short as she grew, she sewed borders on the hems and likewise let out the seams and added fabric when her body expanded in girth. Her raiments were strange, multicolored affairs, patched with paisley, tattooed with needlework, birds, and flowers. She was loyal to what she loved, including clothes. Other children avoided her. Once they gave birth to her, Freya's parents realized how all-consuming parenting was and made sure not to have another. They adored her, but honestly, perhaps not as much as they adored their areas, as they called their studies. Ruth's was quark theory in the physics department at MIT. Harold specialized in ethics in the philosophy department at Harvard. The parents had met in graduate school at a colloquium on integrated academic curricula held at Yale and married. They both changed their name to Rubenstein, as his surname was Rubin and hers Stein. They waited until they were nearly 40 to have Freya, a name that sounded vaguely Yiddish, but wasn't, just right for American Jews. By then, the twin Japanese maple saplings they had planted at a mutual housewarming gift had matured in their Cambridge garden and were high as the house, creating a generous canopy of shade in their front yard. Mother, father, and child could sit at dinner, gloaming light drifting softly through the French windows, each lost in his or her own thoughts, perfectly happy and never speaking a word to one another beyond, "Please pass the broccoli." Harold might hum to himself, a kind of soundtrack to his deep musings, and Freya might babble the songs of the characters conversing in her head. But the humming and singing were low volume, and for the others at the table, the sounds were comforting and subliminal, like the purr of the refrigerator's motor. If Freya were odd, she came by it hereditarily, whether by nature or by nurture, because so were Ruth and Harold, truth be told. Ensconced in their respective ivory towers, they put the absent in absent-minded. On several occasions during her childhood, Freya brought home furry strays, cats or dogs, once field mouse, and asked her parents to let her keep them. Some were probably not so much stray as they were lured. The parents always explained that it was impossible to give them their home because animals entailed too much responsibility and what would become of them when they went on summer vacation. Every summer they went to Rome or Paris or the Cape for a few weeks. A cat or dog could not take care of itself, and so Freya would walk the animal back to where she initially met it, sending it off with tears and returning home in a state of melancholy that her parents barely registered, although once, when she was particularly sad, they bought her a goldfish. If it died while they were away for the summer, they thought it wouldn't be such a big deal. Rapunzel, that was the name Freya gave it, went belly up in the spring before they had a chance to abandon it. Freya put her golden orange friend in a velvet-lined box and buried it under the forsythia bush beneath her window. She decorated the grave with an altar of smooth stones, pop beads, and glistening costume jewels. The parents were distracted and messy, so Freya cleaned up after them, taking their abandoned coffee cups to the kitchen sink and the discarded newspapers to the recycling bin. When keys or wallets were lost, she could find them. She had an innate desire for aesthetic order, not for the exactitude of Versailles, but for visual romance, composed bounty, like Monet's Giverny. She didn't like extraneous objects like junk mail or wine smudge goblets to obscure the simple beauty of the den or dining room. Unlike all the other kids at her school, she did not devour TV or computer games. The buzzy electric pixelation of the screens repelled her. It sounded like insect swarms. Her lack of interest in contemporary culture proved strong evidence of her dimness to the other kids, whose references she never recognized. She liked to sit in the alcove and read her mother's childhood books, The Secret Garden, The Little Princess, The Witch of Blackbird Pond. In high school, she attended a magnet program devoted to the arts, so her patchwork clothes and dreamy mien struck her fellows as less extraordinary than they might have in a more traditional school. Still, her social skills were underdeveloped for many years of minimal use, and she didn't make friends. Some of her peers were even a little frightened of her because she didn't smile or show interest in normal things like TikTok or celebrities. At that age, she graduated to reading Wuthering Heights and Tess of the D'Urbervilles and the complete works of George Eliot. She spent many hours in the ceramic room and painting studio, creating works heavy in symbolism and maybe just a little creepy in an Alice in Wonderland sort of way. Her creative writing teacher took a liking to her, at least to her poetry. Reading as much as she did, Freya's vocabulary was large, and she strayed from the often trite adolescent themes of love and confused identity, as neither were relevant to her. Less obvious were the actual themes of her work. There were obscure phrases and juicy metaphors. A reader could get lost in the jungle of the words and images. Tom, they called the teachers by their first names at the school, found himself dizzied and dazzled in her tangled literary rainforest. Vulnerable due to a recent breakup by which he was surprised and humiliated, he began to fantasize about what he imagined was in his student minds. Just the sight of her would not have aroused his lust. She was a wisp of a human with mere suggestions of flesh, where hips or breasts would be on an average girl her age. Yes, she had rich black ringlets and rosy lips, but these latter did not hide her overbite, nor the former her rather large ears.
Oh, well, thank you very much for sharing your work with us today and for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Helix Press. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please stay safe.